Shabbat Shalom. We had an absolutely amazing second night Seder here at Temple Israel, and it is down to our amazing volunteers. The amount of work and love that went into that project was absolutely incredible, and anybody who was here benefited, and even if you weren't here, you benefit by having your congregation have such an amazing event. But there was one aspect of it that impressed me especially this year, which was at the very end of the night, when we had finished the entire Seder and everybody was done and full and content, a lot of people stuck around and helped clean up. Because that is the hardest part with any event, is the cleanup. Right? You can usually get people to help with the setup. It's not too hard to get people during the middle of a project. But to stick around when it's all said and done and you're tired and you just want to go home and move tables and clean off all of the debris in order that we could have the room ready for the next activity, that's asking an awful lot. But our people stepped up to the challenge. And I want to know how many of them want to come to my house and help me put away my Pesach. Because my Passover is still unboxed. It's still, the dining room is still off limits because that's where all of our Pesach supplies are still hanging out. All of our alternative Pesach meat dishes, all of our alternative Pesach dairy dishes, our alternative Pesach parav utensils, all of the various accoutrements that go, our haroset bowls and mixing bowl, all that stuff. It's sitting there waiting to be boxed up again because it turns out once Passover finishes, things get busier rather than less busy. And there's always a little bit of a lag time that happens here. Now, it would be a whole lot easier if I didn't bother my family with all of this kosher stuff. Right? If we just said, Passover, don't eat bread, no problem. Who needs an extra set of dishes? Who needs more pots and pans and forks and knives and all that? Just don't eat bread and you're okay. But if I did that, would I also be saying don't have a distinction between meat and milk? And would I make that happen all year round? Just one pot for cooking the Alfredo and one pot for cooking the chili, and it's the same pot? Well, today's Torah portion would make me think not so fast that that's not correct. You see, it may feel very burdensome, not just schlepping tables, but to have two sets of dishes plus your Passover backup sets, to have to worry about the separation and the organization of a kitchen that is going to stay kosher. It may seem like it's a lot, but I will tell you it is not a bad price to pay. I'm not saying that it's incredibly simple, although once you get the hang of it, it's not like you're prone to mistakes. And once you've done your initial purchasing, usually you're going to be in good shape for a good long time. We haven't had to add much to our kitchen supplies for a very long time. But that price gets you something. It gets you a sense of sanctity to what is an everyday activity. When we sit down to eat 3 times a day, sometimes more, depending upon our appetite, we have an opportunity to embrace holiness when we are keeping kosher. When we stop and think, what food am I about to eat? Which dishes am I about to use? When we stop and think, well, it's Passover, that means I have to check things for ingredients that are not normally on my watch list. When we are walking down the aisle of the supermarket, every single product that we go past is reminding us that we're Jewish, that there is a connection to our history, to our culture, to our peoplehood that happens in the most mundane and routine of our activities. And there is a sense of awareness of where our food comes from. When I pick something off the shelf and I am trying to decide, is this kosher, is this not? And if it is kosher, is it meat, is it milk, is it parav? I have to walk myself through the steps of, well, where did this product come from? Does it have an animal somewhere in its production cycle? Does it not? Does it have dairy somewhere in its production cycle? And don't tell me nothing of non-dairy, because non-dairy can still be dairy, depending upon how the product was actually derived from a dairy source that now no longer has lactose in it, which is great if you're lactose intolerant, but it still qualifies as dairy as far as kashrut goes. You have to be a bit of a food detective, and that's a good thing, because we are quite alienated from the way our food is grown and produced, but we all ought to be not just more familiar with it for our own health and our own safety, although that is there, but also just for our understanding of how this created world works and how we are sustained. You cannot be grateful if you don't understand that great chain of production that leads all the way back to the energy of the sun pouring light upon our planet. But you know, there is an easy out. Don't eat meat or dairy. Go vegan. Right? Vegan is the dead simple way of doing all of this. Right? Once you go vegan, you don't have to worry about having 2 sets of plates. You don't worry about 2 sets of dishes. Yeah, Passover is still going to be a little bit of an issue. But even there, if you are a fresh fruits and veggie kind of vegan, then great. All you need to do is eat your potatoes, eat your oranges, and you're good for the week. No problem, no questions asked. Now, there are a lot of other issues about that. Most importantly for me, I love meat. And cheese is also way up there too. But there is a different question that has been asked throughout history. Because veganism now is a little bit of a luxury product, but in antiquity, people were often vegan or vegetarian out of necessity. They couldn't afford meat, and so they were stuck with this. And this raised a question throughout our history: are you transgressing by not eating kosher meat? Now, that doesn't mean are you transgressing by eating non-kosher meat. Everybody agrees. You sit down to have your pork and you're transgressing. The Torah is very clear about that. And if you sit down to eat beef that wasn't properly slaughtered, also again, a transgression. But the question is, if I, either by choice or by necessity, cannot avail myself of kosher meat, and so I don't eat meat at all, am I actually transgressing by not eating it? Now, I know it sounds a little crazy to even be asking that question, but bear with me for the logic. The logic goes something like this. As we saw in our Torah reading, God wants us to know the signs of what is kosher and what is not. That we should be able to identify, this is a kosher cow, that is a non-kosher pig. And that we should be able to identify, this food that I am about to eat is kosher, and this food I'm about to eat is not. Well, if I remove from myself all of the food options that could potentially not be kosher, then I no longer have the opportunity to fulfill that mitzvah. I am now mitzvahless when it comes to eating, because I'm just having apples, because I'm just eating oranges, I'm just eating lettuce. Well, actually, with lettuce, you got to check for bugs. But you get the point. You get the point. Well, our sages said, you know what? That is a very good observation, Mr. Annoying person asking the hard questions. Judaism likes the hard questions. But they worked out a very fine solution, because they knew that they couldn't tell everybody, you must have something that could have potentially been non-kosher at every meal in order that you can be acting on it. By the way, even eating meat in the modern world wouldn't be sufficient, because after all, you just bought the meat off the shelf, you didn't pick the animal. If you wanted to take this line of logic to its extreme conclusion, you would need to go out into the field, pick the cow, because you had seen that cow had a split hoof and that cow had chewed its cud. You would also need to make sure you knew about the cow's mother. And then, and only then, would you be truly fulfilling. And the rabbi said, no. We're not doing that. This is not going to be the lobster tank for getting your own cow. Instead, what the Torah is asking us to do is not be able to pick it at each meal, but to know how to pick it should we be in that position. That it is the knowledge, it is the wisdom that we are obligated to acquire, not the opportunity to use that wisdom on a regular basis. Everybody make that distinction there? Right? You need to know how to do it even if you're not gonna do it. You need to know how to pick a cow as separate from a pig, even if you're never going to be in a place, a field, a farm, where you're choosing this animal versus that. The choice, of course, is always important when you're actually buying your products, but the awareness of how to choose is just as important, even if you're not having any meat on your plate. Now, why is this? Well, because, like I said, by necessity, many people would never be in a position to choose between kosher and non-kosher meat because they weren't having any meat at all. Meat is a luxury item that we are spoiled with in the modern world, even paying kosher meat prices, but not something our ancestors would get on a regular basis. However, knowledge, wisdom, this was something that could generate all of those benefits that I mentioned earlier. That sense of discipline, that sense of awareness of the production of food, the great cycle of life that God has built into creation, an awareness of our connection to our culture, to our people, both in space as well as throughout time. All of those things still happen when we study Torah, even if we're not going to be in a position to apply it, even if we're not going to be in a position to implement it. Which is why, as we go through the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, we are going to study about sacrifices that we have been unable to make for almost 2,000 years. And we are going to learn about purity laws, especially in next week's double header of a Torah portion, that are no longer applicable either. Many of them in some capacity are still enforced or commemorated, in particular the topics of Nida, but many of them are no longer implemented in their actual form. This is something that I talked about a lot in my Wednesday class. You can find it on YouTube. But we still derive benefit from our knowledge and awareness of the details of these ideas. Now, I know that's not the way we think in our modern culture. In our modern culture, if something is not immediately efficient, immediately productive, immediately relevant to my life, I don't want to waste my time with it. Right? I am here to get ahead in life, and to get ahead in life, I need an edge. And that means whatever I am learning, whatever I am trying to fill my mind with has to have a practical application. Thus goes the many curricular arguments about having STEM to the exclusion of every other aspect in our educational program and to the detriment of our entire culture and nation, but that's a different conversation as well. But Judaism has recognized that even things we are not going to use, that we will never be a shochet, you'll never be a butcher, it is still on you to learn how you could do it were you to be in that position. Not necessarily the physical actions and practicing the muscle motion, but to understand what it does take to ensure that the food you eat is kosher and to know it well enough that you understand it, that you still gain the benefit from that great cycle of understanding that you would have had you actually picked up the knife yourself. And so too when it comes to the issues of our purity, the issue of our sacrifices, the issues especially of many of the other forms of our criminal or civil mitzvot that we no longer are able to implement, we study them because they continue to enrich us. They continue to deepen our understanding of ourselves, of our history, and of God. And they give us a strength and they give us a clarity of purpose and of life that we would otherwise be lacking. So, while it is fine and certainly a priority to know what do I need to know to get through today, what do I actually need to know that I can use right now, do not settle for that when it comes to Torah. Recognize that there is deep benefit in both spirituality and practical shaping of yourself and the world around you by learning things that seem irrelevant but are indeed part of us down to the core. So, learn it. If you don't know how, ask me and I will show you how. Shabbat Shalom.